Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 42 in which I interview Tammy Yard-McCracken. Now, this podcast is a little bit late, was supposed to air in October during October podcast month for the celebration of my 20 years of being online with my website. Much stuff went wrong on my end, just a lot of difficulties and hurdles that I had to get over. And that's why it's delayed and we only now get to this interview. So my apologies to Tammy for this delay. If you guys want to help me make it up to her by sharing just far and wide this episode so we can make sure that her message is spread to the maximum number of people, I would appreciate that very much. Now, before we go on, I have an announcement, and I will say first this. As always, a big thank you to one of my patrons. So shout out to Eddie Schuurman, who's been with me for about 3 months, I think. He's one of my Orange Belt patrons, and you know, as always, the only reason that you guys can listen to this podcast is thanks to my patrons and their support. So a big thank you to Eddie and my other patrons. And if you too want to support the show or just check out everything we have there, go to patreon.com/Demeere and just check it out and see if it's something for you. Everybody's welcome. Now, here we get to the big announcement that I'm very happy that I can finally say this out loud. So my new book, Boxing for Self-Defense, comes out on Wednesday, November 27th. So that's next Wednesday. It's Sunday 24th as I record this. So the 27th on Wednesday, it'll be available at pretty much all the major online retailers like Amazon and so on. It'll be available both in paper and in an ebook version. So mark your calendars or follow me on social media and on my blog. You will for sure be able to see the announcement there should you forget. I will also do a separate podcast, and that will be episode 43, which I also want to release on Wednesday. And that one I'll exclusively talk about the book, what is in it, who was it written for, what will be in the other volumes, because this is a 3-volume series that I'm writing. So what will the other books be about, and so on. So a bunch of content, some background information that you can then use to see if the book is for you. And I hope it is. Of course, I did my best to make it filled with solid information that you can use for your training, and I hope everybody likes it. So that is coming this Wednesday. Stay tuned for more. Now, before we get to the interview, a very quick thing that I have to point out. So after the interview, Tammy mailed me and she said, look, I refer to her as a psychologist at one point, but apparently in the US, that references a type of license versus the general profession, and it isn't accurate in her case. So I should have called her a psychotherapist, and she told me that because of the ethical guidelines she has to follow in that profession, she wanted to ask me if I could correct that, and that way she is doing everything right, following those guidelines. So with that said, if you hear me referring to her as a psychologist, that's my fault. It's my mistake. I should have known better. And I stand corrected as of this point on here. So, everybody, go to wimsblog.com/42, the number 42, for all the links in the show notes to the stuff that we mentioned during this interview. And other than that, enjoy. Okay, everybody, welcome to the episode. I am here this time with an awesome guest. I have Tammy Yard-McCracken. Tammy, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
I'm very glad that you agreed to come on the podcast, because I'm doing October is basically podcast month for me, and I want to have a bunch of awesome guests, some that I've had before, some that are new, and I immediately thought of you because I've been reading your blog for a while now. Really like the work that you do, and I wanted to. And we were just talking about this before we started recording, that you have an academic background, and I really like it when I have people who actually study and have practical experience along with that to talk about anything that has to do with self-defense and martial arts. So Let's just get rolling. How did you get started in the self-defense world?
That is a kind of a twisty little tale. I will try to have it not take up the entire podcast. And the answer, see if I can condense it. I have a little bit of traditional martial arts training that I picked up when my children were training in martial arts. Kind of kids are doing it, mom will do it to, support the kid kind of thing. And along the way, sort of a little bit of a crossover of the timelines. In my practice, I was in Houston, Texas at the time. In my private practice, I was doing a significant amount of work with relatively new survivors of trauma, physical violence, as part of work I was doing with the county's victim assistance program, which is a support program of helping people get through the court system. And they offer, a certain finite number of therapy sessions to kind of make sure they can get them through that whole testifying thing. And one of the things that I began to notice is for people who stick the therapeutic process out to a natural termination. So it's like I'm at that point where I get to say to the client, like, hey, I love talking to you, but I'm just kind of taking your money now because you're good. You don't need to be here anymore. Yeah. And that even in those situations, there were people who had experienced physical violence, that there was this piece of personal agency that we didn't seem to figure out how to resolve on the couch, and metaphorically speaking, and if it felt like this needed to be a physical something. Yeah. And so having done a smattering of traditional martial arts, I knew that's a long course of training to get to where it's applicable to a self-defense situation, at least in my experience. And these were folks who either I knew wouldn't train that extensively or didn't have the ability or what have you. So I started looking for something that could be a little bit, at least at the outset, there could be some raw skills that would come a little bit more quickly than that pursuit of the black belt, if you will. So I got connected to a Krav instructor in the Houston area. I was just really kind of getting Krav going at that time in the city, and not something I trained in yet, but knew enough about it that at least in the entry stages of Krav, it's fairly straightforward, fairly simple on the onboarding level. So I got a couple of clients who were willing to go take a couple of trial classes. The instructor agreed not to charge them or try to hard enroll them at the business level, which was going to be an issue ethically for me. And I got a couple of people take me up on the offer, and they came back with some really interesting insights into, I may not actually dive into training, but I know there's something out there that I could learn to do fairly quickly that, okay, I can take that aspect of my life back if I feel compelled, which is how I got involved in Krav as far as becoming an instructor. And then through that process, again, every combat fighting system has a sports side or has a rules side or a component that is not directly applicable to self-defense. So that started me to double down to try and get a little bit more connected into, okay, what's missing, what needs to be backfilled. And then, the rest is, they say, is history as it unfolds.
Yeah. Okay. How long have you been working as an instructor now?
That is a good question. 2012, I think, is when I got my certification with Krav Maga.
Okay, that's quite a bit of time. Just generally speaking, how would you say has it changed your life when you look at? And I'm quickly going to frame that a little bit, because you have a very impressive background in academics. You've got degrees in education, professional counseling, and obviously a doctorate of psychology. 25 years as a practicing psychotherapist. So that's, we could say that is a very specific background that you wouldn't necessarily expect somebody to also be a Krav Maga instructor. So sure. I'm assuming that, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but I'm assuming that being an instructor like that must have changed the way that you do, psychotherapy, for instance. Is that true, or am I off base here?
No, that's absolutely true. I have, if we go back to my my adolescent years, like a number of the folks that I work with when I teach in teams, I was not the sharpest crayon in the box as a young human being. And the whole thing that we say about, it's like one of the best ways to avoid violence is to not hang out with dangerous groups who do dangerous things. And I learned that on the flip side. So that little piece is relevant here in the sense that how adding in the physical training component to all the other background that I had shifted my perspective on personal agency at a deeper level. I think most psychotherapists or people in that side of the industry are huge proponents of internal locus of control, personal agency, and all that kind of fun stuff. But adding in the physical component is it takes it to a deeper layer, or it did for me anyway, that it's not just personal agency over the choices I make or personal agency over how I choose to respond to other people and events and circumstances, but it actually also goes to the physicality in my life. I've been a fairly physical person in my life. I've done other athletic things, but being able to in turn add that piece in, it's like, okay, now I also, push comes to shove, I'm unarmed, all of my prevention skills have failed, and I'm potentially faced with a situation. I also have the physical agency as well as the cognitive agency to participate in making the choice on how this turns out. Yeah. And there's a depth to the internal locus of control that I was unaware was available until I hit it. So It was really fascinating.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because it's one of those difficult conversations sometimes that you have with people, and I'm not going to go on a rant. I promise I'm not going to. But I'm sure you find that as well. For instance, being a psychologist, when you read one of those popular articles in the magazine that you're like, okay, you guys just gave 0.0 point whatever percent of information and are presenting it as if it's just this huge discovery, and maybe psychology was talking about this 50 years ago. And I have very much the same feeling when it comes to martial arts and self-defense. So when we get to the point, especially with women's self-defense, when it's about empowerment and this and that, and I'm like, okay, from the way, I mean, you should never assume, but you know what it's like from the way when you see certain instructors, how they talk about things, what specifically they say, and what they leave out and how they present it, you often get a little bit of a sense of how much experience with actual violence they have. And I found that in particular with female self-defense, I've seen a lot of those focal points on the empowerment issue, and like you said, going that route and not necessarily seeing the physical part as equally important, where it's all about feeling good about yourself, empowerment, taking control, and so on. But well, let's just hit the pads for a minute, and then we're done with that kind of stuff. How do you see that balance between the cognitive side and then the purely physical side? Is it like 50-50, or is it in cycles? How do you handle that?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have a really straightforward answer for. I think it's highly dependent in some respects on the audience. And as an example, back in September, I had the opportunity to present a day long, which was amazing. Like, I have a whole day. This is awesome. To do prevention and threat assessment with a group of women. And in that particular audience, the demographic that was targeted for the seminar, somebody else hosted it, so was women who were not going to be able to be physical, or if they needed to, it was going to cost them a lot. So training's off the table from a regular basis, either because of health issues or physical concerns. And there wasn't anybody in the room, I think, in that seminar under 40. So we're, so on that side of the house, I find that the women's self-defense seminars that are all physical are problematic, because it assumes, well, so I'll try not to go off of my own rant here.
That's okay. Feel free.
There's I have a theory, and it's probably completely incorrect because it's totally untested, that the large part of seminars, at least that I see in my communities here, directed on women's self-defense, are just hitting the pads or just dealing with ground control situations and things like that. And there's lip service occasionally given to the prevention and threat assessment, particularly the threat assessment, but it's not actually walked out. And so there's a meta conversation taking place in women's self-defense that as female, you will be a victim of physical violence, and therefore what you need to learn is the physical. The rest of it's just lip service stuff because you're going to get assaulted anyway. So let's just learn how to fight it off as opposed to prevent it. That makes me a little nuts because it goes to that overarching assumption.
Yep.
So with this group of women, I was really excited about the opportunity to just do threat assessment and just go over prevention because some of these, one of the participants has a degenerative disorder, and although she can be self-ambulatory, it's tough on her, and she came to the seminar in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So teaching her how to, get into ground control positions, it's just not going to happen. So flipping that over, the paradox of this is that the pure empowerment message of just stand up and be assertive and set verbal boundaries and you're going to be fine makes me equally nuts because it in a social boundary testing situation that has a potential of working, but if we're talking about a predatory level of engagement, you can be as assertive as you want to be and they're going to work you.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're good at. So your 50-50 conversation in a perfect world is where I would love to see it, like 50% of threat assessment prevention, 50% on the physical side. If I know I have a demographic that the physical stuff is just never going to become a focal point, then that is not where I want to spend my time.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. I used to do a lot more women's self-defense courses, but for whatever reason, the last few years, not as many anymore. But I did one recently in October, and for the podcast listeners, they've heard about this before, but there was this murder in Belgium about half a year ago. This young girl, 21 years old, goes off to meet her friends, goes by the canal where it's not a lot of people around and so on, gets grabbed by a guy. Anyway, he kills her, throws her in the water. It was a pretty big thing here, and as always, a lot of people freak out. Something must be done. And I got contacted, actually, I was quite surprised by somebody who wanted to do something. I said, look, nobody does anything. It's always outrage and prayers, but nobody does anything. Okay, I want to do something for my kids. He had teenagers, and I ended up with a group of about 20 teenage girls. And the way I had 4 hours, so I said, look, I'm not going to teach you how to fight. We will do some physical stuff. That's not going to happen. If in this limited amount of time, what I can only do is just hand you some tools that you're going to have to work with afterwards, but just open your eyes to certain realities and give you some tools that you can use to hopefully never need them, but at least it exists. And if you put in the time to practice and be conscious of that this kind of stuff exists, well, you might avoid a lot of stuff. And at the end, we did a little bit of pad work and physical techniques. And the reason why I mentioned this is because you said this idea of that where there's nothing you can do, you're going to be a victim anyway. I had this really tiny, petite little girl in class, and she was like, came highest at chest level with me, and during the class, I had said something. She asked a question, and I said, "Look, here's the thing. If I'm a predator, who am I going to pick out of all of you?" And she looks at me. I said, "It's not going to be her. She's my height. That would be a struggle. It'll have to be you, because you are, in theory, you will be the weakest one. So, as in nature, predators do the same thing. Look for weak prey. Look for children, and so on. So that would be you. And then when it was time to hit the pad, she just lit me up. She just beat the crap out of the pad harder than girls almost twice her size, so to speak. So, and that's what I wanted to say, because you mentioned that it's this idea of being a victim. Like, I wouldn't want to be the guy who starts with her, because she seemed to make this click in her head, like, okay, I've got to go full tilt. I don't have the luxury of going 5 rounds with this guy. This needs to be over right away, and so I can run. And I mean, she put everybody to shame.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to change tacks a little bit and talk about violence dynamics. So you're an instructor with violence dynamics, and I think we actually met at the first one, because I crashed it. I had this whole plot with Rory Miller that I was going to crash it and surprise Mark McKeown, and that sure worked, because he's like, oh, what the fuck happens? So, and I think I saw you there too, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know if we talked, if we said something, but I don't remember. It's been too long.
I don't know that we spoke. I was conscious that you were there. That was the first one outside of the primary, which is always in Minnesota, and I remember head on a swivel, like, oh, we have these surprise guests and Wim Demeere. I'm like, what? Really? So yeah, I don't think we spoke, but we were both at the same place at the same time.
Well, that was my first, experience talking to the guys and seeing everybody together. And what I liked is that I crashed the part where you guys were doing the urban part, where everybody's walking around having to, I think, tag or put cards in somebody's back pocket, or I forget the drill, but and I actually saw Terry, and he saw me, and his mouth dropped because he didn't know I was coming either. Anyway, and that's what I really liked about that, is those kind of things, just very practical drills and information, as opposed to purely theoretical. Something like, right, let's go outside, let's do this stuff live, in like in the wild, so to speak. So that, as a setup, that's not too bad, I hope. Could you explain? Pretty good. Well, I try. Could you explain a little bit what violence dynamics is?
Yes, and I would love to. I'll start with what it isn't, because in the martial arts, particularly martial arts communities, a program like what we do is rare. And so people have a misconception when you have multiple instructors who come from, different corners of the martial universe. There's an expectation that each person is teaching their own stuff, right? So in, room number 1, we have Rory Miller doing Rory Miller things. And in room number 2, we have Terry Trahan doing Terry Trahan things. And so people go and sort of like pick, I want to learn this from this guy and that from that person. And violence dynamics is not a symposium. It's a course that starts on day 1 and wraps up at the end of day 4. And it's a course that has evolved, obviously, over time, particularly even from when you and our paths converged in Oakland, it's truly a unified curriculum that we have built as a team, obviously fundamentally on Rory Miller's material. And it's evolved through my participation, Casey Kekheisen, who is the founder of it, Rory Miller, Randy King, Terry Trahan's contributions, Mark McKeown, certainly in the beginning. And the material it's the metaphor we use, it hooks and loops like Velcro.
Yeah.
And so we have the first class, the next class hooks into it, and the third class hooks back into those two, and progressively through the 4 days. And it is a convergence of principle-based physical skills. So there's a 60-40, 40% physical, 60% whatever you want to call it, because we have a debate on what we're calling that. But there's the physical stuff is principle-based, so it doesn't matter what your combat or martial art background is. It doesn't matter if you're force professional and your combatives are based on that. It doesn't matter if you are a ninja. It doesn't matter if you're a Taekwondo person. It doesn't matter if you're a Krav person, because we're not teaching you how to learn a whole new way to learn throws. We're going to the principles that make them work and letting people play and dig around with applications in a way that is a little bit more a little bit more realistic when we're doing the physical stuff because there are no mats on the ground. We're in a conference room.
Yep.
On, it's commercial carpeting, so it's basically concrete with fuzz.
Yeah.
And real walls and real corners and real floors and bodies you've never trained with before, and coming at it from a true play perspective. You are my meat puzzle. Yep. And how can I take this puzzle apart? And while I'm doing that, how does mine get taken apart in the process? And so the material progresses from starting with just the principle of structure and how bodies work structurally and where the compromises are and where the advantages are. And we take that and we build on that all the way up through power generation and targeting, and then to how to drop a body to the floor and how to use gravity to your advantage, and little people to big people where you have to manage that differential. And then the academic stuff is the Rory's overarching logic of violence conversation. These are the things that are required in self-defense. These are all the elements that factor in. And then we build off of that with threat assessment and force law or ethical applications of force, depending on where you are. The aftermath. That was our big new course this year. I had the privilege of being able to build that curriculum. But what happens after a violent encounter? What are the realities of that? So those are all dovetailed together into the fundamentals of the 4 days. The end cap of the physical is what we call environmental training. So on the end of the third day, everybody works through stations in the physical plant that we're in, like an office environment, and we do our what we call one-step. You're familiar with one-step? Yep. So we do our one-step drills in here.
Yep.
And deal with that reality. And then the last day we go out, and this is what it sounds like when you showed up for us in Oakland, is we go out into the wilds and break the folks up into teams, and each team rotates. We get to work with everybody. Each instructor works with every team for about 50 minutes and work all of our own particular piece of everything we've been working on through those 3 days, and we apply it out in reality. And it's an amazing experience to be a part of.
Yeah. The sense that I always had when that's okay. You're fine.
Sorry, my watch decided to join the party.
That's okay. The sense I always had when I first heard about violence dynamics, and I tried to follow it a little bit, not as closely as I'd like, but I tried to keep up and watch some of the videos you guys post online. What I mostly saw was more like you said, the integrated approach. So you've got, it locks together the different modules, but that you guys approach it more like, okay, not necessarily this is everything there is about this topic, and we'll just give you a lecture, and then we'll also give you some physical stuff, but more like, okay, this is a skill. So stress assessment is a skill. Handling the aftermath is a skill. It's not just a set of factoids or a bunch of information. No. It's something you need to practice and get good at. And that's the way that I view a lot of things that I teach, is that I want you to become skilled at something as opposed to just knowing a lot of stuff. And maybe do some drills, but it's just the skills don't overlap. And I think that is what you guys are doing. Am I right in that, or
yes.
Is that off base?
No, that's correct. For example, we talk about lots of people who teach in our industry talk to their students about, once you disengage, it would be helpful to check and make sure, check for the broken parts, right? And that's different than actually doing it. And if you don't practice it and you don't train it under stress, you're not going to go, oh, there was this thing that somebody said once that I was supposed to remember now. And so those are, we train those. We integrate those into some of the other physical aspects as we talk about, here's the after incident ritual we want you to get good at, so that you know that you're injured, because adrenaline is going to interfere with that, that body sensation initially, like it's supposed to. And the last thing we want somebody to do is bleed out after they successfully, got out of it, extricated themselves from a bad situation. The same thing with aftermath. There are skills for helping to manage the immediate aftermath once you're to safety, and then the long-term aftermath. And we don't want to just say, oh, by the way, there are skills. We're going to actually walk through those experiences with people. So,
and another thing that I also noticed then, and over the years, I've seen a lot of those collectives start where a bunch of instructors get together, but a lot of them end up really badly, or people stop talking to each other, and then there's all this nastiness online, throwing mud at each other. But you guys seem to be, really getting along, and just it just keeps going. It's been a few years since Violence Dynamics started, and it just keeps growing and growing, and it always seems to be a work in progress. What's the secret?
Well, I'm chuckling initially because I can close my eyes and visualize what you're talking about, like these burnouts, and that flames out. So I do think ego is a factor, and none of us are shy and retiring human beings who are on this team. And there's an overt conscious agreement. So it's not we don't leave this to like, oh, I think everybody thinks this way. Like there's an overt conscious agreement that we will call each other on our own bullshit.
Yeah. And
if we are getting called on it, the agreement is that I'm not going to stand up and storm out and say, fuck y'all, that I may feel like I want to do that. And it may get heated, and it has at times. We've had some heated conversations. But the commitment is to see it through. Like we are all in this because we all have some very deep common beliefs about what's important here. And we are stronger as a team, way stronger as a team. And we each bring something unique to the puzzle, and we'll hash it out if we need to. And there have been some hash outs, and the relationships have been strong enough to be able to withhold that. So, and I think that's probably the secret sauce is both we know we all have egos, and we know that those egos will get in the way at times, and that we're all committed to, one, smacking the other person down, like a little game of whack-a-mole if it happens, and two, acknowledging that it's worth that struggle to maintain the relationships.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I saw you chuckle when I mentioned it, but if you've been in the martial arts self-defense world for a while, you've seen these kind of things just totally explode, and friendships from many years end up just in horrible mess. I've come to another conclusion. I only work with people that I get along with. I've stopped doing all the stuff that I thought I should do many years ago, and last time I did that, I slammed the door on that and I said I'm done. And now there's only a handful of people, because we're friends and we know each other well. I'm like, okay, we'll do something together, and never any problems with those people. It's always okay. We like you said, we talk up front. How you want to do this? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? We're in agreement. Let's go. And afterwards, the friendship is already established, so there's no need to go at each other's throats for whatever ego thing that happens. And if it does happen, the friendship's already there. There's more than just a martial arts there, or self-defense. So that's what I really liked about when I kind of saw this dynamic in your group in Violence Dynamics. Also, that seems that you guys get along, and that it's just a really good team with everybody. Sure, like you said, there's bound to be a couple of heated discussions every now and then, but if that commitment is there to see it through, that's really great, because then effectively, you get to a better place, and you don't end up in that exploding group.
And that's the friendships are, it's fascinating to me, because this is a rough industry to maintain friendships, and they're some of the deepest friendships I've had in a long time. And, there's a connection in between events, like, how are you? How you doing? What's going on? We have a group, like a messenger group that runs all the time, so that we maintain that sense of community among the group. And I think that makes sense. And our heated moments are typically about, well, one, if it's a disagreement on methodology or concept or construct, which is really rare, it is out of passion for making sure that what we're doing is as accurate as it can be.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's a debate over, well, I'm not sure that that's it. I'm not sure that that's, and we'll go back and forth and we'll suss it out. And the couple of times that it's been more relational, it's just only been a struggle because the relationships are important. There's no desire to flame out over it. So
That's really great. Well, what's next for Violence Dynamics? What are you guys up to next?
So the next thing is the 2020 Violence Dynamics Prime, which is always the third weekend in October. And we are right now finalizing the details. We should have them out by next month as far as exact dates. And the reason why I say exact dates is because we're adding on to this one. So ViaDi is typically 4 days. We have the 3 days and the fourth day out in the wild. And we have a day zero that is for people who are returning people. And there's no additional charge. And we do something fun, cool, and different. This year we did scenarios. So we limited the number of people who could come, and we built personal scenarios for each person, and we ran scenarios. In years past, we've done firearms work because we've had accessibility to a range and instructors that we could do that with. Yeah. So we have our normal 4 days and then our day zero. And for 2020, because it's the 10-year anniversary, we are adding a probably 2 days of instructor development course, which comes out of the work that we do with Chiron training in the instructor development. And then probably a crucible day on the back end for people who want a pressure testing experience, both of their psychology as well as possibly some physicality. Still working all those details out, but it is our it's a big blowout event because it's the 10-year anniversary. Yeah. We're going to be doing a lot of add-on stuff, special stuff that we're adding in and layering on top of it to create as dynamic a training experience as possible. This OG track, this secondary track that's for people returning that we tested this year will be even more robust than what we did this year. And it's going to be awesome. In fact, we're not going to do any one-offs in 2020. So we're not, typically somebody will reach out and say, hey, could you come do it here? And if it's in North America and we get that request in 2020, we are not going to. We're going to funnel everything to Prime this year. If we get a request from somewhere across the pond that, we know the majority of those people are not going to make an international flight, then we'll consider it. But
okay, that sounds like a huge project.
Yeah, super exciting.
Okay, where can people reach out and find more or try to get a spot? Because I'm assuming the spots will be going very quickly.
Yep. That's our expectation as well. We're actually going to do it as opposed to like, hey, registration is open. We're going to announce with lots of lead up the date, like, hey, tickets will release on this date. Yeah. Because we can only manage so many bodies for this one. So the best way to stay on top of it for people who are in the Facebook land is to join the Facebook group Vio Tribe. Okay. Because that's where the information will go out first. Partly because of Facebook's new algorithms, the way they handle the fan page versus the group pages, or the group pages are better right now. That's where they're pushing stuff. So Vio Tribe is our group page for Violence Dynamics. Yeah. So that'll be the first place of public announcement on all the details and information. So that's the best initial source. If you've done a Violence Dynamics before, one of the big projects over the next couple of months is the data is scattered to the winds, and we're going to try to collect as many previous attendees' names and email addresses as we can and compile them to a single database, and then do a couple of test emails like, hey, we're saying hi and making sure we have this right. So if folks are outside of the U.S. who have attended a Violence Dynamics and it's been a while and they're not sure, or even in the U.S. if they're not sure that they're in the loop, they can email me and say, hey, make sure I'm on that email list. Yeah. And then we'll make sure they get the info.
Okay. Well, I'll put a link to the Facebook page in the show notes so that people can check it out and get there. All right. So, well, I'm excited to see how that goes. I think it's going to be great, and for everybody who hasn't attended yet, I would get one of those tickets, people, because they're going to be gone soon, and you're going to miss out and curse yourself for years to come if you don't attend that. So, I'm going to make another hard turn here, and we're going to get to pretty much a final point that I wanted to ask you about, and this is, I mean, I think this is awesome. So I think it was about a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years ago, you wrote a letter to Oprah, and that resulted in something really awesome that I'd love for you to talk about a little bit. So could you tell me what gave you the idea to write that letter to Oprah?
So I occasionally lose my mind and rant on the internet, which is stupid because it doesn't do any good except make me feel better momentarily.
I know exactly how you feel. I just won the other day, so it's great. It's great.
So there was a lot of hype over the acceptance speech that she had given at one of the award ceremonies for a Lifetime Achievement Award that she'd received. And so I Googled the speech because everybody was raving, and she's a fantastic orator, if you will. She's incredibly articulate. And so I was like, all right, let me see this. So I'm watching it and I'm like, go Oprah, go Oprah, go Oprah. Wait a minute. Pause. And this is not a bad thing by any means, but she did a lot of verbal support of like, go #MeToo movement. This is going to change the world. And it absolutely has had some impact on awareness, and, which is, awareness is always good. But my experience, could have just been my ears listening the way they were listening to that acceptance speech, was that she was saying this is the beginning of the end of the statistics of violence against women. And she certainly did not say that, but that was sort of my takeaway. And I took issue with that. And because in my experience, the shift comes when, if you got a predator out there hunting, they're sitting back and they're like, you're talking about your young girl, right? Like, if I'm looking who I'm going to pick, I'm looking for what appears to me to be that soft, easy target. And so the stats will change when the expectation of somebody who's out there hunting is 90% of the women that they're looking at probably has training, right? Then 90% of my potential targets are hard targets, and we'll start to see a shift. What that will actually be, I don't know, because that's an unprecedented reality. So I don't have a touchstone to it. But that was where I was like, rah! So what will make the statistical change is when the statistics on expected hard targets change. And so this was my little rant. It's like, all right, give me 500 women. So it's, dear Oprah, give me 500 women that we can train, and then train to be able to go out and teach some fundamental principle-based physical stuff and the threat assessment stuff across the board, not just the classic social violence kind of things, but also the asocial elements. And let's create a base of effective instructors who are going to empower women, but also empower them with realistic aspects of physical and how the dynamics the precursors are going to evolve and all that kind of stuff. Let's get them out there training, and they'll train 500. There was shows you how old I am. There was a commercial for I don't know if it was shampoo or conditioner or some product in like the 70s maybe. And the television commercial was, she'll use this and it's, her hair will smell great, and she'll tell 2 friends, and then they'll tell 2 friends, and they'll tell 2 friends. So that influences how I think about things, sad to say. But it's the reality. If we get 500 women teaching 500 more women, who some of those rise up to be instructors, and then they'll teach 500 more, and eventually we'll reach a statistical tipping point. And that's when we can start evaluating whether or not we have a change in those numbers. So here I am, keyboard warrior, and a good friend of mine who's a martial artist and owns a marketing company. And her husband and I are really good close friends in the self-defense industry. She's like, somebody should do this. I'm like, yes, somebody should do this. She's like, no, you. I'm like, no, not me. I have too many things to do. And she thankfully she didn't let up on me. And now we are starting a thing.
Cool. And I'm going to, in a roundabout way, talk about this. And I think you're absolutely right. There was a show a few years ago on Belgian TV, and it was about retired doctors, just general MDs, when in their 80s, talking about what it was like to be a young doctor, like, over 50 years ago. And they were talking about practicing medicine in like the late 40s, early 50s, and so on. And one of the doctors said, they had these horror stories about personal hygiene and illness and disease spreading that way. And he said one of the biggest factors in the health of the general population was then when Belgium started with this service, which is basically kind of like a child and family service, like, helping people have children and helping them in their family life. And one of the most fundamental changes they made was just promoting basic hygiene. What do you mean I can't wear my shorts for a week on a day in, day out? What do you mean? It's clean, right? No, you can. What do you mean I have to wash myself every day? Yes, you do. And just that took several years, and when it just spread out until to the point they did it long enough that we had a whole generation that grew up like that, and they would teach their children. It's like, okay, no, you have to brush your teeth every day. Not just once a week, every day. And same thing for what we now consider just really rudimentary knowledge, but everybody knows that. And I think if you can achieve something similar with 500 Rising, is that like you said, that tipping point is what you need to create a fundamental change in society. And we both work with women who have been abused and raped and assaulted, and it's one of the most horrible things that I find as a teacher to work with people like that because of the trauma that they went through. But on the other hand, it's also one of the most rewarding for me, because when you can actually help somebody get over the trauma a little bit better, or find some self-confidence back. And one of the best things I ever had was meeting one of those ladies who was in one of my sessions years later, and there was this radical change, and she said, it's thanks to your course that I actually started seeing things differently. Then she did years of work, and then she was leading a pretty happy life. So that's why I think it's such a huge thing. But I just get, like you, so annoyed at the way that it is so often done in this way. Like, no, not like that. Don't go rah, but get practical. Do stuff that you can give to a woman, and then like, right, okay, pass it on now. Pass this on to your daughters. Pass this on to your girlfriends, and so on. Okay, I'm ranting. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So we built, this good friend of mine who kept driving this point home. She built a website for it. So 500 Rising now has a website, and the day-long prevention course that I taught in September was really the first official thing under that brand, if you will, that we did. And then the next one that is scheduled on the books, and I'm very excited about this because it's rare, at least in the U.S., for a police department to bring an outside trainer in. It's not a thing. And there's a police department in Minnesota that is bringing me in for 4 days to offer a sort of foundational entry course in teaching for the police department, for their female police officers to be able to teach a community service, what we call First Friday here at our gym, which is a once a month free workshop in whatever we happen to be doing that particular week or that particular month. It's self-defense focused for women. And so that is under the 500 Rising name, and they're opening it up to other law enforcement agencies in the area and civilians as well. So I have a handful of compatriots, some female instructors from across the U.S. that I have a huge amount of respect for, who have expressed some interest in getting involved as well. So that's probably the first huge thing that we're going to be doing.
Really great. And what would a typical 500 Rising training session or course be like? Could you give a little bit of an introduction for the women listening now who would like to attend one? What can they expect?
So the course that we're developing for May is split into 2 units. So we have day 1, day 2, and then day 3, day 4. So like unit 1 and unit 2. In part of this is just for our logistics in law enforcement agencies sometimes have the staffing struggle of releasing an officer for 4 days of training. Yeah. So we're, creating a like part 1, part 2. And we're going to be working on for the fundamentals of if we're going to of running a community outreach type of program where you're not likely to always have the same women every time they come. Yeah. So how to build a closed circuit. There's a workshop by workshop so that you don't have the luxury of the developing, evolving curriculum. Like when I have students here 3 times a week for 3 years. So we'll be talking about it from a curriculum standpoint. We're going to be doing some physical skills training from a principle-based perspective so that regardless of the physical martial arts background the instructor may have, they can, it's a little bit of a side note here, or rabbit trail. When women's self-defense, and I've certainly taught this way initially, and so taught this way in return, we tend to teach things based on specific events. Like, here's a defense to a choke on the ground. Yep. Here's a defense to, right. And the downside to that is that, in my experience, the majority of women who access these kinds of workshops, and you alluded to this as well, are that skill is not going to help you unless you go home and you rep it. Rep it. And a lot of these women are not going to do that. So if I just teach you techniques, then, and unfortunately the circumstances arise that you have to defend yourself, your brain is going to be going, which box does the technique live in that matches this situation? And there's a high probability you're not going to find it. But if you understand how bodies work, and you understand leverage, and you understand how gravity plays in, and you understand balance, and you understand structure, and you understand momentum and power generation, then I can solve the problem you throw at me, even if I have never seen a formal technique for this. Yeah. So we're going to focus more that way on the physical side, like how to train from a principle-based perspective, and make any techniques that are tied to that. Yeah. So the women have the capacity to problem solve on their own. That's where the power comes from, I think. And then we'll also be looking at the fundamental threat assessment pieces that should go into basic entry-level self-defense.
Yeah. All right. Great. Well, again, I'll put a link to in the show notes for people to check out 500 Rising, and very much again, any ladies listening to this podcast, I very much recommend that you check out what Tammy is doing there, because it's very much worth your time. And I have a daughter. She's almost 19, and that's one of the things that we talked about a lot: prevention, the mental aspects, and some physical stuff as well. But if it's not for you, you just sign up your daughter, sign up your nieces, and so on. Just get some training. It's not comfortable sometimes to do this kind of training, because you have to face harsh realities, and that's very uncomfortable sometimes. You're going to have to maybe go way out of your comfort zone, but it's worth it. It's totally worth it. If you can just avoid even one instance of a guy who clearly has bad intentions and that helps you get away, I mean, for me, it should be mandatory in schools, for instance, this kind of training. But I know I'm dreaming out loud here. But yeah, I just don't get it that violence is just ignored, basically. Anyway, okay, I'm gonna stop ranting. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap this up if it's okay by you for the first part. So for all the listeners, Tammy and I are going to continue recording, and we're gonna head on over to my Patreon page. So patreon.com/Wim Demeere. Again, links in the show notes, where she's going to answer a bunch of questions from my patrons. And I have some really cool questions, and I think she's going to give even cooler answers. And Tammy, where can people reach you? Do you have a website or anything else that you want to direct them to?
Yeah, a couple of different ways to get a hold of me. my email is on the website to the local training center here that I own in Virginia, which is CORE with a K, coreselfdefense.com. And you can find ways to get a hold of me through that. I'm on Facebook, as much as social media makes me kind of crazy. I'm on Facebook personally, Tammy Yard-McCracken. You can find me there. You can, we have the 500 Rising website is 500rising.com. Can get me a hold of me that way. Instagram. So I'm fairly easy to find.
Okay. Well, I'll put several of those links on in the show notes so that everybody can find you there. Tammy, a huge thank you. I think this was great. I really liked a lot of the stuff that you said was just, I think it's going to be very, very helpful for a bunch of people. I would love for you to come back on the show if you have some time in the future. I know you're crazy busy, but maybe after the big Violence Dynamics project, the next one that is over with, because I'm sure it's going to be a crazy hectic time. Again, thank you for your time, and I think that we're going to wrap it up now for this part, and then we're off to Patreon. Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks for listening to the Will Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wilmsblog.com.